The coral formation rose 12 feet above the sand, pockmarked with decades of erosion and 3 days of naval bombardment. The cave entrance was narrow, 4 feet across, maybe 5 feet high, cut deep enough that daylight died 6 feet in. Smoke drifted across the opening from a burning Amtrak 200 yards down the beach. Palm fronds, shredded by shrapnel, lay scattered across the approach like broken fingers. Inside, voices, Japanese, low, controlled. The kind of discipline that came from men who'd decided how they would die. Private First Class Kowalski moved forward on his stomach, bar cradled in his elbows, 20-round magazine locked and checked. The weapon's 19 pounds felt heavier in the crawl. Bipod folded, selector switch set to automatic. 550 rounds per minute if he held the trigger down. He'd fired it twice since landing. Both times at movement he couldn't confirm. Both times the magazine had emptied faster than his training had prepared him for. Behind him, Sergeant Vargas held a fist up. Stop. Check. The sound of distant artillery rolled across the island, 124 milli howitzers working over the interior ridgeline. Closer, the methodical crack of rifle fire. Somewhere to the south, a flamethrower opened up, and the wind carried the smell of burning fuel and worse. Kowalski settled into position 25 yards from the cave mouth, angled 30 degrees off the entrance axis. The manual said 10 yards for cave suppression. Vargas had lost 2 men yesterday, finding out the manual was wrong. 30 degrees off angle, 25 yards. Far enough that return fire had to find him before he found them. He braced the bar against his shoulder, found the cave opening in his sights. The barrel wavered slightly. He forced his breathing down, felt his heartbeat in his hands. Somewhere in that darkness, men were waiting to die, the way their training had promised. Face to face, steel on steel, spirit against spirit. Kowalski squeezed. The bar opened up with a sound like canvas ripping. 20 rounds in 3.5 seconds, walking across the cave entrance in a figure-8 pattern he'd practiced exactly twice. Tracers showed the geometry. High right, low left, center, sweeping, continuous. Then the cave swallowed the rounds, and the sound changed. Screaming. Not human screaming, metal screaming. High-pitched wails of jacketed lead hitting limestone at angles, multiplying, fragmenting, ricocheting in patterns that filled every cubic foot of enclosed space with supersonic trajectories. The noise built on itself, layer after layer, until it sounded like a machine shop had exploded inside the coral. 4 seconds. 5. Then Kowalski's magazine ran dry, and the noise didn't stop. The ricochets kept going, bouncing, finding new angles, decaying slowly into silence. No return fire, no voices, no sound at all. Before we continue, click that subscribe button, like this video, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It brings me great joy, knowing that these war stories and lessons get to people all over the world. Your support helps us bring more thrilling war stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now let's get back to the story. Vargas moved forward with 3 men, weapons trained on the entrance. They waited 30 seconds, a minute. Then Vargas stepped to the side of the opening and looked in. He turned back and nodded once. When they entered, flamethrower ready, grenades in hand, they found 8 Japanese naval infantry. None had been hit by direct fire. Every wound came from rounds that had bounced off stone, through the jaw, through the ribs, through the back. One man still gripped his rifle, bayonet fixed. He'd been facing the entrance when a ricochet found his spine. The cave that doctrine had promised would be their fortress had kept its promise. They died inside it, exactly as trained. Just not the way they'd imagined. The Browning automatic rifle, model 1918A2, was never supposed to be a cave-clearing weapon. John Browning had designed it in 1917 for trench warfare, a walking fire rifle that would allow advancing infantry to suppress enemy positions without stopping to set up crew-served machine guns. By 1944, it had evolved into something its inventor never anticipated: a portable precision instrument for killing men who couldn't see what was killing them. The specifications were straightforward: 19 pounds, 4 ounces unloaded. Add a 20-round magazine, and the weight jumped to 22 pounds, nearly twice the burden of an M1 Garand rifle. Length, 47 inches, impossible to maneuver in tight quarters. Caliber, 30-06. Springfield, the same round that fed the M1919 machine gun. Effective range, 1,500 yards in theory, though most bar gunners never engaged past 300. The selector switch offered 2 rates of fire: slow, 300 to 450 rounds per minute, used for deliberate suppression and ammunition conservation; fast, 500 to 650 rounds per minute, employed when volume mattered more than precision. On the fast setting, a 20-round magazine emptied in under 4 seconds. Most gunners were taught to fire in bursts, 6 rounds, roughly 1 second, then shift position before return fire could find them. But the numbers only explained what the bar could do. They didn't explain what made it revolutionary. The tactical difference was structural, not mechanical. The Japanese Type 96 and Type 99 light machine guns were superior weapons in some respects: lighter, faster firing, easier to maintain in tropical conditions. But Japanese doctrine distributed them at a rate of 2 or 3 per company. Treated as specialized support weapons, requiring dedicated 2-man crews, a gunner and an assistant who carried ammunition and fed belts. American doctrine was different. By 1943, every Marine rifle squad carried 3 bars. Every Army squad carried at least 1. This meant that a 12-man Marine squad possessed organic automatic firepower, equivalent to a Japanese platoon's crew-served weapons, and could employ that firepower instantly, without waiting for machine gun teams to establish position, clear fields of fire, or coordinate with squad leaders. The Bayard democratized lethality. It transformed automatic fire from a specialized capability requiring training, coordination, and setup time into something an individual rifleman could deliver on demand. A Marine squad could advance with 3 men capable of suppressing an enemy position simultaneously from different angles without shouting coordinates or waiting for supporting fire. This distribution philosophy extended to production. By mid-1944, American factories had manufactured over 350,000 BRs, more automatic rifles than the Japanese had produced light machine guns for their entire military. The New England Small Arms Corporation alone produced 168,000 units. IBM, retooling from business machines to weapons, added another 20,000. The Japanese had built an army around spiritual power and bayonet charges. The Americans had built one around mass production and squad-level firepower. When those philosophies collided in a coral cave on an unnamed island, the outcome wasn't determined by courage or training. It was determined by how many automatic weapons each side could put in the hands of ordinary infantrymen, and how fast those weapons could turn sanctuary into coffin. The Sakusen Yomure, the Imperial Japanese Army's Manual of Operations, devoted 17 pages to Seishin Kyoiku, spiritual education, and the cultivation of offensive spirit. Section 4, paragraph 3, stated it explicitly. The power of the attack is dependent on spiritual strength. When this is exerted to the utmost, material inferiority can be overcome. Bayonet training consumed more hours than marksmanship. At the Toyama Military Academy, recruits spent 6 months learning to thrust, parry, and deliver the killing stroke with proper warrior spirit. They practiced charges against straw dummies until the movements became reflex. They memorized the principle that one Japanese soldier, properly motivated, possessed the fighting power of 3 Chinese or 2 Russian soldiers, not through superior equipment, but through superior will. The Infantry Manual of 1909, still in circulation in 1944, contained 2 paragraphs on automatic weapons and an entire chapter on close combat. The philosophy was institutional. Technology could be manufactured, but Bushido could not. A nation with limited industrial capacity had decided that spiritual power was the asymmetric advantage that would offset American material superiority. Cave defense fit this doctrine perfectly. Underground positions leveraged terrain and determination against firepower. Japanese engineers spent months carving interconnected chambers into coral and volcanic rock, creating fortresses where defenders could absorb bombardment, survive assault, and emerge to fight at close quarters, where courage mattered more than caliber. The caves weren't merely defensive positions, they were spiritual battlegrounds, where Japanese infantry would prove that will could defeat machinery. American doctrine had evolved in the opposite direction. Field Manual 740, Rifle Company, Infantry Regiment, published in 1942 and revised throughout the war, treated firepower as the foundation of infantry tactics. The manual assumed that riflemen would suppress, automatic weapons would destroy, and maneuver would exploit. Spiritual rhetoric appeared nowhere in its pages. Courage was expected but never quantified. Victory was a math problem, more firepower, applied more rapidly, with better logistics. By 1944, American squad doctrine had standardized around the bar as the primary assault weapon. The 12-man Marine Rifle Squad organized into 3 fire teams, each built around a bar gunner. The squad leader's primary responsibility was positioning those 3 automatic weapons to create interlocking fields of fire. Every other role, rifleman, assistant gunner, grenadier, existed to support the bars. Training reflected this priority. Marine bar gunners received specialized instruction at Camp Pendleton and Camp Lejeune. Fire discipline, barrel management, immediate action drills for jams, and the walking fire technique that gave the weapon its name. They learned to fire from the hip while advancing, to suppress positions without stopping, to deliver continuous automatic fire while the squad maneuvered. The Japanese trained soldiers to die gloriously in prepared positions. The Americans trained them to survive by making the other side die first, preferably from 25 yards away, with automatic weapons, before hand-to-hand combat ever became necessary. When these doctrines met in the caves of the Pacific, the collision was asymmetric. Japanese defenders positioned according to principles designed for an enemy who would assault directly, who would give them the close-quarters battle their training had prepared them for. Instead, they faced an enemy who had mechanized killing, who treated caves not as fortresses, but as geometry problems, enclosed spaces where ricochets multiplied lethality and courage became irrelevant. The spiritual power the manuals promised would overcome material disadvantage never arrived. The bayonets they'd trained to use never found targets, and the fortresses they'd built to leverage determination against firepower became the very chambers where American industrial doctrine proved that mathematics, not morale, determined modern warfare. Kowalski settles into the prone position, bars bipod legs digging into coral sand. 25 yards. The cave entrance fills his sight picture, a dark oval roughly 4 feet wide, 5 feet high, cut back into the formation at a slight upward angle. He can't see past the first 6 feet. Doesn't need to. The selector switch clicks to automatic. His thumb finds the magazine release, checks it's seated. 20 rounds. 150 grain full metal jacket, 30 Ur-6 Springfield. Muzzle velocity, 2,800 feet per second. At this range, Each round carries roughly 2,400 foot-pounds of energy, enough to punch through a steel helmet at 600 yards, enough to remain lethal through multiple ricochets in an enclosed space. He exhales, squeezes. The first round exits the barrel at 2,750 feet per second, the velocity loss minimal at 25 yards. It enters the cave mouth high and right, impacts limestone 8 feet inside at a 40-degree angle, and deflects downward. The copper jacket strips partially on impact. The lead core fragments into 3 pieces. 2 pieces retain enough mass and velocity to continue, one striking the cave floor and ricocheting toward the ceiling, the other caroming off the right wall toward the interior. Inside, Corporal Tanaka registers the first impact as a sharp crack followed by a metallic whine that rises in pitch. He's positioned 4 meters from the entrance, Type 38 rifle braced against the cave wall, bayonet fixed. His squad, 8 men total, occupies predetermined positions in a chamber, roughly 12 feet deep, 8 feet wide, 6 feet high at the center. They've been waiting 3 hours. They're ready for the assault, for the grenade that will announce the American advance, for the moment when close combat will prove what the manuals promised. Kowalski's burst continues. Rounds 2 through 7 walk across the entrance in the figure 8 pattern he'd practiced. High right, low left, center, sweeping in a continuous motion that takes less than 2 seconds. Each round that enters the cave creates its own cascade. The tracer, every 5th round, shows the primary trajectory, but the ricochets are invisible, supersonic, multiplying. By the time the 8th round enters, the cave chamber contains over 20 lethal trajectories. Rounds bounce off the ceiling at angles that send them into the floor. Floor strikes deflect into walls. Wall impacts create crossing patterns that fill the enclosed space with what the after-action report would later describe as a cone of unpredictable fire. Tanaka feels the impact before he hears it. A sledgehammer blow to his left shoulder that spins him against the wall. The round that hit him entered the cave as the 3rd shot, bounced off the ceiling, struck the floor, and tumbled into his body at an angle no aimed shot could have achieved. He's trying to understand what happened when the 2nd ricochet finds him, this one through the ribs from behind. Private Yoshida, positioned deepest in the chamber, where he should have been safest, takes 4 hits in 3 seconds, none from direct fire, all from rounds that have bounced twice or more. The geometry is exact. The cave's dimensions create a kill zone where ricochets converge. The deeper you position yourself, the more trajectories can reach you. Kowalski's magazine runs dry at round 20. The entire burst has lasted 3.7 seconds. He releases the trigger, and the mechanical sound stops, but inside the cave, the metallic screaming continues. Rounds still bouncing, losing energy incrementally, finding flesh until physics finally wins, and the supersonic whine dies into silence. No return fire, no voices, no movement visible through the entrance. Vargas waits 30 seconds, then signals the advance. When they enter, the forensics are immediate. 8 Japanese defenders, all dead or dying. The wounds tell the story. Entry angles that make no tactical sense. Impacts from below, from behind, from trajectories no rifleman could have aimed. One man has been hit 5 times, each wound from a different angle. Kowalski stares at his weapon. 20 rounds, 8 men. He'd been aiming at an entrance. The cave had done the rest. Tarawa, November 1943. The first documented use of the figure 8 cave suppression technique appeared in 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines' after-action report. Lieutenant Hawkins' scout sniper platoon had cleared 3 fortified positions using concentrated bar fire before grenades or flamethrowers were employed. The report noted, bar fire into cave openings from oblique angles produced unexpectedly high casualty rates among defenders without exposing assault teams to return fire. By the time Marines secured Betio Island 76 hours later, the technique had spread through word of mouth and direct observation. Sergeants taught it to privates between assaults. Corporals demonstrated angles and burst patterns during brief lulls. No formal training bulletin existed yet, but the knowledge transferred anyway, the way battlefield innovation always does, carried by men who'd seen it work and wanted to survive the next cave. Saipan, June 1944. 7 months later, the technique had become doctrine. Field Manual 2175, Cave and Tunnel Warfare, issued in April, codified what Tarawa had discovered. Bar suppression from standoff positions, 20-30 yards, at oblique angles, 30-45 degrees off entrance axis, creates ricochet effects in enclosed spaces that exceed direct fire lethality. Follow with WP grenades for confirmation, then coordinated entry. The white phosphorus addition came from hard lessons. Willie Peter grenades served two purposes. The smoke confirmed the cave's internal layout before entry, and any defenders who'd survived the bar burst would reveal themselves trying to escape the burning chemical. Marines on Saipan cleared 487 caves using this combined technique. Casualty rates among assault teams dropped 60% compared to Tarawa's direct assault methods. The scale-up was geometric. Where Tarawa had seen dozens of caves, Saipan had hundreds. Japanese engineers had spent months carving defensive networks into Mount Tapachau's volcanic rock. Each cave system required the same procedure: position, angle, burst, mark, clear. Bar gunners fired an estimated 180,000 rounds into cave entrances during the 25-day battle, more ammunition expended on suppression than the entire Tarawa operation had used for all purposes. Iwo Jima, February 1945. The Japanese had learned, too. Caves on Iwo connected through tunnel networks that allowed defenders to retreat from suppression fire and emerge from alternate exits. The American response evolved accordingly. Simultaneous suppression of multiple entrances, coordinated squad movements to seal exit routes, and the introduction of pole charges, explosives on bamboo poles that could be inserted into cave mouths after bar suppression created temporary clearance. The coordination required was unprecedented. A single cave complex on Hill 362A required 3 bar gunners firing synchronized bursts while 2 demolition teams approached from flanking positions. The operation took 8 minutes from initial suppression to final clearance. In 1943, the same objective would have cost 12 casualties and an hour of close combat. Okinawa, April 1945. By the war's final major battle, cave clearing had become an industrial process. Marine and Army units maintained detailed logs, cave dimensions, rounds expended, time to clearance, casualties inflicted versus sustained. The data revealed the technique's efficiency, an average of 32 bar rounds per cave cleared, with assault team casualties reduced to near zero when proper standoff and angle were maintained. The 96th Infantry Division cleared 738 caves in the first 2 weeks using standardized doctrine. Recon determines entrance dimensions and suspected depth. Bar team establishes position at prescribed angle and distance. Suppression burst delivered in figure-8 pattern. WP grenade for confirmation. Demolition team seals or clears based on tactical requirements. What had begun as improvisation on Tarawa had become mechanized procedure on Okinawa. The Japanese had spent the war building fortresses underground. The Americans had spent it perfecting the mathematics of turning those fortresses into tombs, 20 rounds at a time, from 25 yards away, without ever seeing the men inside. The cave-clearing doctrine that emerged in the Pacific required something beyond tactical innovation. It required ammunition, staggering quantities of it, delivered continuously across 6,000 miles of ocean to islands that possessed no infrastructure, no ports, no roads. The mathematics were unforgiving. A single marine rifle company, with 36 bar gunners, clearing caves at Okinawa's doctrinal rate of 32 rounds per position, would expend 152 rounds per day, assuming modest engagement rates. Multiply that across 3 battalions per regiment, 3 regiments per division, and the numbers became astronomical. The 3rd Marine Division alone fired an estimated 1.8 million bar rounds during the Iwo Jima campaign, more ammunition than the entire Japanese military had allocated for light machine gun use across all theaters for the entire year of 1945. American industry answered with production capacity the Japanese couldn't comprehend. The New England Small Arms Corporation in Worcester, Massachusetts, manufactured 168,380 bars between 1940 and 1945. IBM's plant in Poughkeepsie, New York, a facility that had produced typewriters and punch card machines 18 months earlier, retooled and delivered 20,000 bars after a 6-month conversion. Marlin Rockwell in New Haven added another 61,000 units. By war's end, total bar production exceeded 350,000 weapons, but rifles without ammunition were paperweights. Lake City Army Ammunition Plant in Independence, Missouri operated 24 hours daily, producing 30-06 rounds at a rate of 5.6 million per day by mid-1944. Frankfurt Arsenal in Philadelphia added another 1.5 million daily. Twin Cities Arsenal, Denver Ordnance Plant, and St. Louis Ordnance Plant combined for an additional 4 million rounds per day. Total U.S. .36 production during the war exceeded 41 billion rounds, enough to fire every bar ever manufactured continuously for 3 years without reloading. The logistics chain stretched from Midwestern factories to Pacific coral beaches through a system the Japanese never successfully interdicted. Ammunition left Lake City by rail, 100-car trains carrying 3,000 tons of cartridges in wooden crates, moving to West Coast ports every 48 hours. At San Francisco and San Diego, longshoremen loaded Liberty ships with standardized cargo, 500,000 rounds of 30 U-06 per vessel, packed in moisture-sealed containers designed to survive tropical humidity and salt air. The voyage to forward supply depots took 30 days. Ulithi Atoll, a logistics hub 850 miles from the Philippines, processed 60 million rounds monthly by early 1945, receiving, cataloging, and redistributing ammunition to combat units faster than Japanese factories could produce it for their entire military. Supply officers tracked consumption rates by division, by regiment, by company, adjusting shipments to match tactical demands in real time. On the islands themselves, ammunition dumps materialized within hours of beachhead consolidation. Tarawa's supply depot operated 48 hours after landing. Saipan's was functional in 36. By Okinawa, logistics battalions could establish forward dumps capable of supporting a Marine Division's ammunition requirements, including bar-specific allocations, within 12 hours of securing a position. Japanese soldiers hiding in caves faced an enemy supported by an industrial system that produced more ammunition in a single day than their entire nation's arsenals contained. The spiritual power their doctrine promised would overcome material disadvantage, confronted a logistical reality where American factories manufactured bullets faster than Japanese soldiers could die. The caves weren't defeated by individual courage or tactical brilliance. They were defeated by the same force that characterized American warfare in every theater: relentless, mechanized, industrial capacity that treated ammunition as an infinite resource and victory as an engineering problem solved through mass production and continuous supply. Private First Class Kowalski never spoke about the cave. His son found the Purple Heart in a shoebox after the funeral in 1987, awarded for wounds received on Okinawa 3 weeks after the incident, unrelated, never mentioned. There was no letter explaining what he'd done. No diary entry, recording how many men had died when he'd squeezed the trigger. Just the weapon qualification card showing bar expert and a photograph of 12 men, 3 of whom didn't survive the war. The efficiency was documented. At Tarawa, Marine casualties averaged 3.2 men per fortified position, cleared using direct assault methods. By Okinawa, using standoff bar suppression, the ratio had dropped to 0.1 casualties per cave, a 97% reduction. The mathematics saved thousands of American lives. But mathematics didn't describe what happened inside the caves, or what it meant to survive it. Sergeant Ishikawa Takeo, one of 47 Japanese soldiers who surrendered on Okinawa after cave bombardment, described the experience in a 1978 interview for NHK's documentary series. "We couldn't see them. We heard the weapon, not like a rifle, continuous, mechanical. Then the sound changed. The bullets weren't just coming through the entrance anymore. They were coming from everywhere, the ceiling, the walls, behind us. One moment we were waiting to fight with honor. The next moment, we were dying in darkness from wounds we couldn't predict or prevent. The casualty ratios were asymmetric in ways that warfare had never been. Japanese combat deaths in cave defenses exceeded 95% across all major island campaigns. American assault team casualties in cave-clearing operations, after doctrine standardized, remained below 5%. This wasn't the grinding attrition of trench warfare, where both sides bled equally. This was industrial-age killing where one side possessed the tools to deliver death from safety, while the other died in prepared positions that became tombs. Lance Corporal James Whitmore wrote to his mother from Saipan in July 1944. "They tell us we're saving lives by doing it this way, theirs and ours, but it doesn't feel like combat. It feels like execution. We never see them until after. I keep thinking about the men in those caves, waiting for a fight that never comes. Just darkness and ricochets and dying before they know what happened." The moral weight lived in that gap, between tactical efficiency and human cost, between lives saved and lives taken, between the mathematics that justified the method and the reality of men dying in stone chambers from wounds delivered by enemies they never saw. Post-war reconciliation brought some survivors together. In 1985, at a memorial on Okinawa, former Marine Gunnery Sergeant Paul Henderson met Ishikawa for the first time. They stood at a cave entrance, now marked with flowers and incense. Henderson had cleared 11 caves using bar suppression. Ishikawa had survived one. "I was following doctrine," Henderson said through a translator. "So was I," Ishikawa replied. They stood in silence, 2 old men contemplating a hole in coral rock, where doctrine from 2 different worlds had collided and left mostly Japanese dead. The efficiency had been American. The dying had been Japanese. The moral burden belonged to both. Henderson for having survived by killing efficiently. Ishikawa for having survived when his training had promised death with honor. The BR's tactical revolution saved lives by taking them at distance, through geometry, without the mutual exposure that characterized traditional combat. Whether that made it more or less moral than bayonet charges and close-quarters slaughter remained a question neither efficiency reports nor casualty statistics could answer. The men who'd fought in and against those caves carried the answer privately, in silence, until their deaths, and even then, most never spoke it aloud. The cave-clearing doctrine that emerged from the Pacific didn't end with Japanese surrender. It became the foundation for how modern militaries understood infantry firepower and the design of weapons that would define the next 70 years of warfare. The Soviet Union studied American bar employment through captured Japanese intelligence reports and their own Pacific Campaign observations. By 1947, Mikhail Kalashnikov was designing a weapon that incorporated the core lesson. Every infantry soldier should possess selective fire capability, turning entire squads into mobile automatic weapons platforms. The AK-47 emerged directly from the principle the bar had demonstrated, that squad-level automatic fire, distributed widely and employed aggressively, determined infantry combat outcomes more than individual marksmanship or tactical positioning. The U.S. military formalized the lesson in 1957 with the M14, and then refined it in 1963 with the M16. Both weapons designed around the assumption that had proven true in Pacific caves. Modern infantry combat required every rifleman to deliver rapid, sustained fire. The era of bolt-action rifles and specialized automatic weapons ended. The era of universal automatic capability began. NATO standardization protocols embedded the doctrine into alliance-wide training. Small unit tactics centered on automatic fire supremacy, with every squad organized around suppression, maneuver, and overwhelming firepower at the point of contact. The cave tactics became room-clearing tactics, then urban warfare doctrine, then counterinsurgency standard practice. The principle remained: deliver more fire faster than the enemy can respond, from positions that minimize exposure. Japan learned the lesson differently, but learned it completely. The nation that had based military doctrine on spiritual power and bayonet charges rebuilt itself around the industrial capacity that had defeated them. Within 15 years of surrender, Japan had become the world's second-largest economy, powered by the same mass production principles and quality control systems that had enabled American ammunition factories to outproduce Japanese military output by factors of hundreds. The irony was noted by Toyota AG, who transformed Toyota from a struggling manufacturer into an industrial giant using methods adapted from American wartime production. We studied how they made the weapons that defeated us, and we applied those lessons to making automobiles. The principle was the same: efficiency, standardization, continuous improvement, and scale. Japanese engineers visited American factories in the 1950s and returned with detailed reports on the production systems that had manufactured bars, ammunition, and Liberty ships. The Toyota production system, later adopted globally as lean manufacturing, emerged directly from studying American wartime industrial methods. The nation that had lost the war by underestimating industrial warfare won the peace by mastering it. By the 1980s, reconciliation had evolved beyond diplomatic formality into personal connection. Veterans organizations sponsored joint pilgrimages to Pacific battlefields. Former enemies stood together at cave entrances on Saipan, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, sites where American industrial firepower had met Japanese doctrinal conviction with predictable, devastating results. At a 1995 ceremony marking 50 years since war's end, retired Marine Colonel James Bradley and former Japanese naval infantry officer Nakamura Hideo unveiled a memorial at a cave complex on Okinawa. The plaque bore text in both languages. Here, soldiers of two nations learned that courage without wisdom leads only to death, and that victory without reconciliation leads only to future wars. The bar itself became obsolete, replaced by lighter, more versatile weapons. But the tactical revolution it represented, squad-level automatic fire as the foundation of infantry doctrine, remained the organizing principle of every modern military. And the industrial lesson it taught, that production capacity, logistics, and technological distribution determine outcomes more than individual valor, reshaped not just warfare, but the post-war global order. The caves of the Pacific once tombs for men who believed fortresses and spirit could overcome firepower, became memorials to a harder truth: that modern warfare is decided by systems, not soldiers, and that nations survive not through martial virtue alone, but through their capacity to produce, distribute, and employ technology at scales that transcend individual courage. The cave entrance on Okinawa looks smaller now than it did in 1945. 70 years of weather have softened the coral edges. Vegetation has reclaimed the approaches where Marines once crawled with bars and flamethrowers. A wooden marker stands nearby, weathered kanji and English, explaining what happened here, how many died, when, why the site has been preserved. The opening measures 4 feet across, 5 feet high. Standard dimensions for a defensive position. Large enough to allow defenders to fire outward. Small enough to limit exposure to incoming fire. Japanese engineers had calculated these proportions carefully, based on doctrine refined through years of continental warfare. They had built this cave, and thousands like it, to be impregnable. They hadn't calculated for ricochets, for geometry, for an enemy that would treat enclosed spaces as mathematical problems rather than tactical obstacles. For a weapon distributed 3 per squad, supported by logistics chains that delivered millions of rounds monthly, employed by men trained to kill from distances that made courage irrelevant. The single bar burst that cleared this cave in 1945, 20 rounds, 3.7 seconds, 8 casualties, was not an anomaly. It was not battlefield luck or individual heroism. It was the concentrated expression of American industrial warfare. A weapon designed in 1917, refined through 2 decades, mass-produced in quantities that Japan couldn't match, distributed according to doctrine that treated firepower as infinite, supported by logistics that made it infinite, and employed by soldiers trained to maximize lethality while minimizing exposure. The Japanese defenders who died here followed their doctrine exactly. They positioned themselves according to manual specifications. They maintained discipline. They prepared to die with honor. Their training had been rigorous, their fortifications sophisticated, their resolve absolute. None of it mattered, because the Americans weren't fighting a battle. They were solving an engineering problem, and they'd brought industrial solutions, standardized weapons, systematized tactics, and supply chains that treated ammunition as a renewable resource rather than a precious commodity. The spiritual power Japanese doctrine promised would overcome material disadvantage never stood a chance against an enemy that had mechanized the act of killing and distributed that capability to every squad, in every company, in every division across the Pacific. The lesson of the cave isn't about American superiority or Japanese failure. It's about what happens when doctrines built on pre-industrial assumptions collide with industrial age warfare. When courage meets mathematics. When fortresses designed for one kind of battle become coffins in another. Modern infantry doctrine across every military on Earth reflects what was learned in caves like this one: that squad-level automatic fire determines outcomes, that production capacity matters more than individual valor, that technology widely distributed defeats concentrated courage, and that victory in modern warfare is achieved not through spiritual power, but through systems, weapons, logistics, training, and industrial capacity, operating at scales that transcend individual human agency. The cave entrance is silent now. The men who died inside are dust. The weapon that killed them is in museums, but the lesson remains, carved as permanently into military doctrine as the cave is carved into coral. In modern warfare, industrial systems defeat human courage. Not because courage doesn't matter, but because against automatic fire, logistics, and mass production, Courage alone has never been enough. The flowers at the memorial are fresh. Someone still remembers. But what they're remembering isn't heroism or tragedy. It's the moment when an older form of warfare died in darkness, killed by geometry, 20 rounds at a time.